SNCC was one of the major civil rights organizations. And when the word went out that we would have a march on Washington, we felt that it was a must that we be part of the march. I think many people in SNCC and many in some of the other organizations didn't think there would be that many people turning out for a march on Washington on August the 28th, 1963.
What did you speculate? 1,000 people, 2,000 people? What did you think?
During the early part of the planning for the march, we thought maybe 50, 60, maybe 70,000 people would show up. But on that day, I think it was more than 250,000. I think it was probably 500,000 or more people that showed up. I think it was one of the great undercounts of all time. There was a sea of humanity.
Why did SNCC want to be part of it?
We had emerged as one of the key organizations in the movement. And the people in the South, more than any other part of our country, have sort of paved the way with sit-ins, freedom rides, marches, and we felt that we had to be part of it. It was the young people. It was the students, hundreds and thousands of college students, elementary school students in Birmingham, high school students in Albany, Georgia, in Selma, Alabama.
In 1963, I was in school, but I remember seeing it on television and wondering why there were so many young people there. How did you convince so many young people to participate?
The young people saw by way of television what was happening, especially those in the South who said that we're going to march. We're going to march in Birmingham, we're going to march in Atlanta, in Jackson, Mississippi. So when the call went out for the March on Washington, many of the young people wanted to be here. They wanted to travel by bus, by train. Many of the churches made buses, their own church buses, possible for people to come. But not only from the heart of the South, they came from all across America. They came from Philadelphia, from New York, from Milwaukee, from Detroit, from Buffalo. They came from Chicago, from Los Angeles.
When you realized that so many people had come from all over the country, what did you think personally? What did you think of seeing this sea of humanity on the mall?
I was deeply moved and deeply touched when I looked out and saw all of the people. After A. Philip Randolph introduced me and said, I now present to you young John Lewis, the national chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, I looked to my right and I saw all of these young people, not just SNCC workers and volunteers. Then I looked to my left and I saw many young men in the trees trying to get a better look at the podium. And then I looked straight ahead and there was hundreds and thousands of young people, young girls and young boys, but young men and young women with their feet in the water trying to cool off.
Were you nervous when you got up to speak?
I was not nervous. I've spoken a few times before in different places in the South, especially in Nashville, in Atlanta, in Mississippi, in Arkansas, but never to a crowd like this. I looked straight ahead and I said to myself, this is it. And I went for it.
Do you think the march fulfilled your expectations of that day?
The March of August 28, 1963 did more than fulfill my expectation. It was almost a holy moment. The people that came from all over, they were black, they were white, they were Latino, they were Asian American, they were Native American. They came like they were going to some revival or going to church. When you look at some of the photographs today, the women dressed well. They were well dressed. Some of the women, especially those coming from the South, they were wearing hats. The men had on suits and ties. Many of the SNCC people, many of the young people had on their jeans, their coveralls, because that was the denim to identify with the people we were working with. But they were ready to participate in the moment.
What kind of impact did that moment have on your life?
That moment changed me and made me more determined than ever before to go back to the South and to continue to fight, to continue the struggle, to continue to take the long, hard look, and not to give up, but to give in or give out.
Did you look forward 50 years and think you would be a member of Congress?
I never thought or dreamed that 50 or 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years later, I would be elected to some political position, such as a member of the Congress. If someone had told me 50 years ago that I would be a member of the House of Representatives for 27 years, I would say, you're crazy, you're out of your mind, you don't know what you're talking about. If someone had told me 50 years ago, at the time on the March on Washington, that I would live to see an African American elected president of the United States, I said, you must be dreaming. But I think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. knew what he was talking about when he said, I have a dream today, a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I've often said since then that Dr. King had the ability to turn those marble steps of the Lincoln Memorial into a modern-day pulpit. He knew he was preaching. He knew he was getting over. And he did get over. He got a message, not just to the people there, but by way of the media, to the nation and to the world.
For thousands of people here in 2013, that's about all they know of the March on Washington. They know Dr. King's speech. But there were so many other people involved in organizing it, like you, like A. Philip Randolph, like Bayard Rustin. Do you think your participation and their participation has sort of been overshadowed by Dr. King?
I think people should give Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. his due. He was the embodiment. He was the personification. He was the symbol of the struggle. And only Martin Luther King Jr. could do it the way he did it. He made us all feel like we were somebody. He gave us a sense of hope, a sense of optimism. He inspired us. If it hadn't been for Martin Luther King Jr., I don't know what would have happened to me personally. If it hadn't been for Dr. King, I don't know what would have happened to our nation. He probably saved us as a nation.
Do you think we need, when we look in our history books, though, do you think we need to learn more about the Pullman Porters Union? Do we need to learn more about CORE? Do we need to learn more about the other organizations and the other men and women who were involved in changing America?
I think it's important for young people, for those that are born and growing up and those that are unborn and generation yet to come, to study not just Martin Luther King Jr. and his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but study A. Philip Randolph. This man was a prince of a man. He was an unbelievable human being. It was only A. Philip Randolph that could hold this group together. In some of those meetings, he would say, "Brethren, if you cannot say something good about somebody, don't say anything." And on occasion, he would say, "We come this far together. Let's stay together." It was only A. Philip Randolph who had been this labor leader, this spokesperson for civil rights and human rights, this unbelievable organizer that can bring a Whitney Young of the National Urban League, or Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, or James Farmer of CORE, and the head of the National Council of Churches, Eugene Carson Blake, or Walter Reuther of the United Automobiles Workers Union, a Rabbi Jerome Prince of the American Jewish Congress, and Matthew Almond of the National Catholic Council for Racial and Social Justice, and the young people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that I represented. I often said, if A. Philip Randolph had been of another color, maybe born on another continent, maybe he would have been prime minister, president. He was the master. And the day of the march, when we all had finished speaking, Dr. King had concluded his speech, President Kennedy invited us down to the White House. No, President Kennedy didn't like the idea of a march on Washington. When we met with him in June of 1963, and Mr. Randolph said in the meeting, "Mr. President, we're going to march on Washington." And you can tell the body movement of the president. He started moving around in his chair. And he said, "If you bring all these people to Washington, won't there be violence and chaos and disorder, and we will never get a civil rights bill through the Congress?" Mr. Randolph spoke up and said, "Mr. President," in his baritone voice, he said, "this will be a peaceful, nonviolent protest, and we're going to march on Washington." We left that meeting with President Kennedy, came out on the lawn of the White House, and said we had a meaningful and productive meeting with the president. And we went out, we organized, we mobilized, and the people came. And after the march was over, President Kennedy invited us back down. He stood in the door of the Oval Office and greeted each one of us. And he said, "You did a good job, you did a good job." And when he got to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he said, "And you had a dream."
And after that, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 65, things happened.
If it hadn't been for the march, maybe, just maybe, we would have got a Civil Rights Act passed, but not as soon. Maybe we would have got a Voting Rights Act. But the march was a defining moment, a defining hour for America. I say often it was one of the finest moments in the history of our country.
In your life too?
Oh, it changed my life. I know I'm a better human being because of the March on Washington. It instilled in me a greater sense of hope.